Hey friend, welcome back to another episode of Parents Who Write. Today I have with me the amazing Sarah Werner. Sarah is a writer, speaker, podcast creator, and executive producer whose mission is to help creators find confidence, success, and ultimately delight in their work. In addition to writing and podcasting, she is also a national public speaker who has been invited to talk about creativity, podcasting, marketing, and leadership for TEDx, Austin Film Festival, Podcast Movement, Podfest, PodCon, and more from her community, YWCA to YouTube headquarters. You've done so many cool things, which is why I'm already like, okay, we'll have you back on the show. Why don't we just start off, though, with you telling us a bit about your writing background and what your journey's been like?
For me, writing has always been a way to sort of exist in the world in like a safe way. It's been a way to kind of create my own safe haven, my own safe space, to, be in a place where, especially as a child, you don't really have control over your environment. So that's how that all got started. Presently, I still write for the same reasons. I write to, what's the saying? Write the world in which you wish to live. Yeah. So I don't think that's an exact quote, but it's something like that. And so one of the things that I love doing is I switched from blogging to podcasting back in 2014. And really, so I was in marketing at the time. I was a full-time marketer. I am now self-employed as a writer full-time. But years and years ago, I was in marketing for 10 years. And I was doing all these experiments just to see. And it wasn't anything I really was hugely invested in. And so I was willing to experiment. And so I was like, okay, I'll just start a podcast and compare that to my blog and see how it goes. And like the podcast, this was 2014, 2015, and it kind of took off. And this was a different podcast. This was Right Now with Sarah Werner, which we have you as a guest on. And I'm excited for that episode to come out. But really looking at the time, there were only, I think 500,000 total podcasts in existence versus like 1.2 billion blogs. And so it was really nice to find a way to stand out and to be, not seen, but heard more widely. And so I fell in love with podcasting and I continued doing that. And then when I left my day job in 2017, I was like, I've always wanted to write a novel, but I feel like I don't know. Okay, this is going to sound very silly because I've had a writing podcast at this point for years. And it's like, I don't know how to get it published. Like there were so many obstacles that were horrifying to me. There was like querying agents and like formatting your manuscript and like getting it to look right and knowing how much of it to send to an agent and, should I self-publish? And it was just this nightmare. And so I went back into where I was comfortable, which was podcasting. And I was like, okay, so here's the thing. I could sit in front of my microphone and tell a fictional story. And like, I was like, I have invented audio drama. No, I didn't invent it. But like at the time I didn't know it was a thing. And so I started doing some research and I found all these other shows and really sort of went down a rabbit hole and got really into the idea of producing my own fictional podcast. And so Girl in Space came out in 2017 and kind of took off.
You mentioned that you are a full-time writer and that you make money doing that, right? I don't know about you, but when I got out of, I got my BA in Lit from American University. And when I got out, I was like, I'm going to be a writer. And I had no idea what that would look like. So I became an editor and I love being an editor, but there's tons of people out there who can't fathom how do you become a full-time writer and actually live off of that? So please share your wisdom with our listeners.
I would love to. As much wisdom as I have, I will share. So yeah, I was in marketing for a decade. And during that time, I started looking around because I knew I didn't want to be in marketing forever because I had dreams like so many of us do. And at the same time, I also had no idea how to become a paid writer. And so I was just kind of like doing different things. And at that time, I had the Right Now podcast that was going full steam ahead, and I had a Patreon for that. And I also had started taking on freelance writing gigs. And those originally stemmed from my job in marketing. They were just people who didn't want to go, with the agency. They couldn't afford to work with the agency I worked for, but they were happy to work something out with me on the side. So I did some of that. I also got connected with a person who ran a ghostwriting publishing business. And and I started ghostwriting books. And like really I touched my microphone. And really that was when it became more feasible. And but I think for me, the thing is, I really diversified what I was willing to do. And for years and years, it was not fun. Like I would get up at 5, I would go to Caribou Coffee, which is a thing here in the Midwest. I'm in South Dakota. And I would write there until like 7:45. And then I would get in my car and drive to the marketing agency where I would work from 8 to however long. And then I would go home. And like you're nodding because I think for so many writers, this is very normal. You're working like 3 jobs at a time plus parenting. And I would come home and I would be like, well, time to work on my passion project. And it's like, I had already spent the day like writing a book for someone else and, and you get busy and you volunteer. And I was leading a writers group downtown just because I needed that in my life. And it was a lot. And I honestly, that was over 10 years ago. And I think I'm still. I was going to be like, is that was your 20s? Yeah. That was in my 20s.
Right? They're 20s. Yeah. Where we've got that extra woomph.
Yeah. You have energy, which I don't have anymore. I was in my late 20s at that point and I had tons of energy. And it's like, even then it was hard. And I think that all these years later, I am still dealing with the burnout from that, as weird as that might sound. Like, or maybe I've just become a very tired person. Either of those, potato. But yeah, that's what it looked like. And I wanted to make sure. I joined a mastermind group when I was still at the marketing agency, and it was me and 2 other people who were interested in leaving our day jobs and being self-employed. And so the 3 of us really had a little, like a cabal of like, we'd meet once a week and we would say, okay, what are your next steps? And we'd really push each other and say, what are your next steps? Did you create your LLC? Do you have a business credit card? Do you have between 3 and 7 independent forms of income of some kind? I really do also want to stress that if you're interested in doing this, for me, it was a good idea to have multiple income sources at the time, just in case I had like, if all of a sudden the ghostwriting place fell through, then I wouldn't all of a sudden be with no income. Because I'd also have like, I had my Right Now Patreon, and that trickled in a little money. And I was like selling a podcasting course and that trickled in a little money. And so I just had all of these different income sources. Again, it took a long time to set up and it was not fun. I ghost wrote 7 books and it was good practice, I suppose. But for me, writing is the act of being myself on the page. Like that's where I get the fulfillment and value. And like writing for someone else, it was funny because I was like, I'm writing full time. Why am I so unhappy? And it was because I was, I was using my writing for something that made me kind of exhausted instead of giving me energy back into my own work where I could exist and dwell and really explore my own thoughts on the page. And so it took a few years. I don't want any of this to sound like it was a fast process. Like this was gradual over like 5 years. This happened very, very gradually. And eventually we got to the point where I had enough clients. I was doing marketing consulting. I was doing freelance writing. I was ghostwriting books. And then I was also building websites and I had the Patreon for Right Now podcast and a few other things. And we were comfortable enough where it's like, okay, so now let's do things like look for health insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And people talk about taking, quote unquote, the leap. And it was so not a leap. It was sort of like a gradual, like, crawl up a flight of stairs. It wasn't just like jumping into a chasm and like being free. It was definitely a long process, but it also, I think taking it slow also let me create something that was sustainable and like wouldn't flop, if one small thing went wrong. And so I don't know, good, bad, and ugly. What I can say is I'm happy where I am now. I am never going back to work for anyone else. And nope, this is it.
I love it too. I gotta say, cheers to that, because I love what I'm doing right now too. Yeah. Very interesting about ghostwriting, because I've had so many people inquire about ghostwriting. And I do agree that it is a great opportunity for learning. But I can relate to what you were saying, because when I was working on editing 9 nonfiction publications, and that was my day job, and I was working on extremely important topics like human trafficking and drug endangered children, which, by the way, I couldn't work on after I had my own children.
That was
heavy.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it was extremely heavy. But I was happy to be working on content that I thought was really helping people. But then I would come home and I was very burnt out and struggled to work on my passion projects. And then I had kids. So, put all that together. But editing other people's manuscripts and learning how to do that in a constructive way helped me to be a better writer. And you seem to have mentioned the same thing. I was curious what genres you were editing for those 7 ghost books.
Yeah.
Ghost books. They're not ghost books.
I mean, they kind of are, because my name's not on the cover. And do they really exist? I don't know. I did learn about structuring. I learned a lot about how to tell someone else's story and like how to listen. And how to take what they said, because basically the way it worked is you would sit down with clients and they would like info dump to you, and like you'd be furiously taking notes and you'd come up with a rough outline for the book. And they were mostly like nonfiction self-help guru kind of things. And so, you have to learn how to listen really well, and you have to understand what they expect, because a lot of the times they won't know how to explain to you their expectations, or they'll have expectations and just not let you know what they are. And then, at that point, you write the book and then they're like, oh, and you're like, oh no. But so that was important. And it was also good to learn what it felt like to work on writing and get paid for it. And by that, I mean understanding, okay, am I going to charge per word? Am I and just even going through and understanding like what the values of paid writing look like. That was actually very helpful as well. I like to go back to, I don't know who originally said this, but I read it recently in If You Want to Write by Brenda Ullin, that no word is ever wasted. And so even if you are, at one point I was doing freelance writing for like a sewer pipe company, and like
fun.
Yeah. Like some kind of and then, I had construction clients and but at the same time, you're honing your craft, you're understanding how the words flow together. It's so, I like to tell myself that it was a good learning experience. But I think the biggest thing I learned is that I was not happy doing that. And I did not want to do that for the rest of my life.
So I would also imagine that you got 2 other benefits from that, though. One was, especially if you have these people who are info dumping at you, I imagine that you also then had to learn how to capture their voice.
Yes.
So it teaches you about just how to convey a different character in a different voice.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually interesting because all of the books are from a first-person point of view. And, AKA the quote-unquote author, the person who was sort of sharing their experience through the book. And we would do voice and tone documents. And this was a holdover from when I was in marketing, and I was working on, I did mostly digital marketing for the last 5 years of my career. And a lot of that was understanding your audience, which translates over to book marketing, to, whatever else kind of, you have to know who you're talking to and how to talk to them. And so it was really understanding that the person for whom I was writing the book was like simultaneously the voice and the audience, because like I was writing it for them. So it was very weird. And you have to like learn how to listen to how they speak and see what they're trying to say. Something that was very helpful was, I didn't learn this term until later, but comps, like understanding other books, like, oh, I want this to sound like Seth Godin, or I want to sound like Malcolm Gladwell, or I want to sound like Brene Brown. And like when you have those touchstones, that helps, but it really is a good idea to put together a voice and tone document ahead of time. And that goes for book writing, freelance content writing, anything like that.
My professor had us do an assignment where he gave us permission to eavesdrop on other people's conversations when we were like standing in line in cafes, and to just record what they were saying. It sounds so awful, like when you think about it from a privacy situation, and people be like, what? You're invading my privacy. But it was just fascinating to record the way that people talk to each other and the different tones that they had and the word choices they would use and how that changed based on age, based on mood, based on setting. So that was like I think a week-long plus assignment where every day we had to find a location to listen to people. And I got to say, I love writing dialogue these days.
Yeah.
I love it.
Oh, I do too.
So
it's
right?
I don't know. It's kind of everything.
And then the second thing I was thinking that could still help you, even if you're writing about pipes and construction, is that in the future, if you have a character and you need them to have a job, you've got that stuff to pull from that makes that character all that much more believable.
Yes.
So again, no word is wasted. I agree with you.
I appreciate you saying that. I think, what was it called? Drop form construction or slip form construction? I don't know. It was like this like very technical thing. And I'm like, yep, I know that thing now. Yeah. I never like to say that like, oh, you have to like slog uncomfortably through something and like come out of the other side and whatever. But like maybe that was part of it too.
So you mentioned Patreon. And again, that's something that a lot of writers are curious about. So can you talk to us about how that helps bring income, but what you're providing for your audience and that balance?
Yeah.
I know a lot of writers, especially when they're starting out, struggle with partially understanding, but also owning their worth and what they have to give. So maybe speak to that a little bit, but then also how it works with Patreon and combine those two. I'm thinking if it didn't just overwhelm you.
That's good. We're good.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, I started my first Patreon, I think in 2013 or 2014 for the Right Now podcast. And then when I launched Girl in Space, I launched a separate Patreon for that because the two audiences are very, very different. The Right Now podcast is for writers, and those were largely people 40, 50 and over. And then Girl in Space attracted a younger crowd, more interested in drama. So they were very different, two very different audiences. And so I set up a Patreon for each. So if you're not familiar with the concept at this point, Patreon is a third-party donation platform where people can donate. At the time, it was either per episode of the podcast that you recorded, or they could pay on a monthly scale. Monthly scale, I don't think that's the right word, but they could pay monthly. And it was kind of nice to have one of each. So the Right Now podcast was per episode, and then Girl in Space was per month, just because so much time was lapsing between episodes. And honestly, most people give like either $1 an episode or $1 a month. I have different tiers, and each of those tiers, they get different things. I moved very quickly away from offering physical rewards because mailing and shipping and keeping track of things, like at the very beginning, it's like, oh, if you join at the $3 per episode level, you'll get a keychain and I'll write you a letter every month. And it's like, that got to be like a whole nother job. And so
yes,
I would definitely advise leaning towards digital rewards that like are a one-time download. The other thing that I did that worked really nicely was shout outs in the episodes. That was pretty easy to keep track of, who to thank for each episode and at what tier. So, starting at $3 a month or $3 per episode, you get your name mentioned in the credits. So that kind of stuff ended up working a lot better than the physical rewards. Something else that, it was kind of frustrating, but that I've seen kind of across the board was that something like less than 1% of your audience will donate on, insert platform here. So whether it's Patreon or Ko-fi, coffee, however you say that, Kofi, or PayPal or whatever you have set up, it's going to be less than 1% of your audience. And that kind of sucks. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because I'm so grateful for these people because they keep the show running. And I mean, even at the beginning when I was making $3 an episode from 2 donors, it was okay, that money's going toward my hosting fees or going toward, whatever. But yeah, it can feel very discouraging. It can feel very discouraging. Yeah, I don't want to talk about, crowdfunding because I don't have experience with that, but that is another option if you want to go by a per project, money making basis. Just be careful which platform you choose. Yeah. I'm trying to think I feel like there's a second part to the question.
Oh, just about assigning your worth, feeling like you can do that and invest in yourself and say, hey, I need help. I'm putting this stuff out for you. I appreciate it. But I know my mentor had so many conversations with us about helping us to acknowledge that we deserve to get paid. And it still sounds weird in my mouth to say those words. But we're putting all this time and this effort in the knowledge, the experience, but still a lot of people still have a hard time assigning worth to what it is that they are producing and putting out there. And I'm very much in the category that writers should get paid for what they're doing. And I remember in the beginning, a lot of times with submissions for short stories and whatnot, and there's nothing. So, kind of connecting that idea with Patreon, but then also in general.
I appreciate this question so much. And I have so many thoughts about it. So I graduated college during the recession, right at the beginning of the Great Recession. And I had people I had friends who had a degree in physics and they were working the night shift at 7-Eleven. And I was working at the time I was working downtown Chicago for a software company where I would do license auditing. No, it was not fascinating at all. It was a slog and it was terrible, but it paid. And it's so interesting. At the time, I thought about writing as a luxury. I thought about writing as a reward in and of itself. It was something, at the time, it was a hobby. It was something that I got to do for myself when I got home from work. It felt like an indulgence. And at that time, also, since we were in the recession, a lot of my friends were writing, let's see, how did they put it? Quote, for exposure, unquote. So they would write articles for the Red Eye or whatever. And the deal was they'd write it, they wouldn't get paid for it, but their name would, quote unquote, get out there. And so I don't know if that's as common today as it was. I'm sure it is, actually. I'm sure that people still, yeah, no, I'm sure that's still a thing. Yeah.
That's still a thing.
Yeah, your name will get out there. And there's a lot of, I don't know, it's kind of gross and abusive and manipulative. But, so yeah, that's kind of where I started. And as I continued writing, I was writing for fun. And I continued writing for myself for fun through my next couple jobs. And then when I got to the digital marketing agency, where I worked for 5 years, and I started looking at freelance writing, it was such a mindset shift to go from writing as my special treat to writing as something that's work, that's something I should be compensated for. It was just such a strange thing. Something that did help was that the marketing agency, that I was working for charged hundreds of dollars an hour. And I was like, well, if they can charge X amount of money per hour for the work I'm doing for them, why can't I charge something a little bit more reasonable, not hundreds of dollars, but maybe whatever an hour. There are also some really great guides online if you end up doing nonfiction writing or content writing, or if you write articles, et cetera, if you end up doing some editing, which I'm sure you know, Erin. There are great guides online to see, per word, with this much experience, here's how much I should be making, or here's how much I can ask for. But it was very strange making that transition. And I still struggle with it today, honestly. I struggle with, there's episodes of the Right Now podcast about this. It's like, is writing work? What kind of writing is work? When is writing fun? What is the difference between fun and work? What does it mean to expend versus gain energy? Like, it's just like this, it still continues to be this like weird nebulous thing. And it feels so arbitrary. Because at the beginning, I was putting in hundreds of hours on Girl in Space, for example, and I was getting $4 a month at the very beginning. And it's like, okay, that comes out to a small fraction of 1 cent per hour of work I put into this. And I think that depending on what you're writing, a lot of the time, we kind of have to do the work up front and then hope that we'll get paid for it. Unless you have some kind of like sponsor or patron of the arts or whatever backing you and saying like, here's a grant, or, if you do crowdfunding or something, then you have the money up front. But it's kind of like oh boy, I hope I can continue making money off of this. So I marketed the heck out of it and ended up growing my Patreon that was actually my biggest source of income beneath I was also building websites at the time. I was a Squarespace developer. And, because you do 900 things when you're working for yourself at the beginning. And so, I grew those Patreon. And it's, again, like I said, it's so arbitrary because somebody listening on the other side, for me, in the case of audio dramas, someone listening on the other side or someone reading your work, your 99-cent ebook, they're like debating and putting value on your work. And you can really get into like a weird place of thinking about that. So I put in hundreds and hundreds of hours into Girl in Space, the audio drama, and I made X amount of money. And then in 2019, I landed a deal with Netflix to turn Girl in Space into a TV show. And for one 30-minute pilot, and I had, I wasn't show running. I was just going to do I was going to co-write the pilot, and I was going to be a writer's room consultant. And my agent also got me an executive producing role, which was beautiful. But, the whole thing is, basically everything at Netflix gets canceled. And so we had written the pilot though. And for this 30-minute pilot, they paid me 6 figures. And I'm not saying that to like brag, but it's just like the amount of time I spent co-writing that pilot versus the hundreds of hours that I put in, to literally any other creative work I've done. It's just so arbitrary. And that is frustrating.
Yes, thank you. Arbitrary was the word I was about to say. And I had a hard time even as an editor when I joined All Right Well and coaching. I was like, okay, I need to put a number to my editing and I have to commit to that. And I struggled with that, even with my own mentors in the past telling me, and I'll love Maria forever because she sat there. And so I average 3 cents a word. And now if you have 100,000 word manuscript, we're looking at $3,000. And I would like choke at having to say to people that it's $3,000 for that. And Maria was like, okay, how much did you spend on your master's degree at Johns Hopkins? How much did you spend on your lit degree at American University? How many years of experience do you have editing other people's books and being an editor prior to becoming a fiction book editor? Like she walked me through all of that. And every time I was like, thank you. She was like, how many additional writing workshops did you go to over the years? How many other writing events did you attend? How many other authors have you interviewed for your podcast? And so, like I said, I'll love her forever for forcing me to acknowledge my worth.
Oof. And maybe not even acknowledge your worth, but like even taking the baby step of realizing that you have worth. I don't know if that's something that you struggled with at all, but like, I mean, going from a person who, grew up in a very like simple home with values of like, serving other people. It was just like a double like mindset shift to understand that like my work is worth something. Like even just taking that tiny step was like mind blowing. But I love what you said about having a mentor walk you through that. I also had that. I had somebody, well, my mastermind group at first, and then I had other mentors along the way. I make sure I always have at least one mentor. I like multiple, but having at least one mentor to walk you through and really push you and say, hey, I know that, you know, you'd be happy being a starving artist, but no, you wouldn't because you'd be starving. You need to pay this and this and this. How are you going to get that money? And have them really challenge you on that.
And it's like for other things, I don't think twice about paying a plumber to come in my house and do the work. So why is it that I struggle to say, okay, I'm worth this for my work? Like, so I just encourage every writer out there to embrace and acknowledge and own up to the fact that your voice and your words and your ideas, they have worth, regardless of where that you've got experience coming from somewhere, and it's still worthwhile.
Something else, just real quick on that note, part of the mindset shift for me too was it was easier for me to charge for my nonfiction work. It was easier for me to ask to be paid for the things that I didn't want to do. And I like ended up making this correlation between how much did I suffer while I did this? And then here's how much I get paid. And I ended up with this like really, I feel like harmful correlation between if I'm going to make money, I have to hurt and suffer for it. I have to like push myself through this project that I hate. I have to like work long hours and actually physically suffer. And that's what makes the money. And it was really, really hard to disentangle that myself from that as well.
Yeah. You know, something else that just popped in my mind, but I want other people to think about it too. Again, when I was choking about the whole like, oh my God, $3,000 for 100,000 words. I also had to look at and face the quality of the work that I do and be proud of that and be like, yes, it is 100% worth that. And so same thing with any other writer or editor to take that, look at what it is that you're doing and the quality that you're putting in there. And whether or not, if it took you 5 minutes, sometimes the most beautiful poem can come out in just a second. Other times we like slave over that poem. That one word that drives us insane for like over a year. But that doesn't change the worth of it.
Right. And that even adds another arbitrary layer. Like, are they paying me for my time then? Or are they paying me for like the perceived value of what I create? And who like makes that value, like who sets an objective value on that? And is there one? And usually there's not. And so, woof.
Right. So another thing that I love, which, oh my God, so much. But another thing I loved was the fact that you were talking about those next steps. And that was another thing that was fundamental with my previous mentor who helped me to move forward and not get stuck. It was at the end of everything, we always had to have a tiny next step. Because if you think about the entire process, right? Like when I really started becoming a full-time editor and author, and I was like, I need an LLC and I'm going to need contracts and I'm going to need legal support. I'm going to need tax people to help me with stuff. I still get overwhelmed with the whole tax stuff, but right. But all of that is just so overwhelming if you think about it. And so when you just break it down to what is the very next thing that I need to do that is so easy, I can't fail. And even if it was just researching LLC options, people who can help me set that up, like not form the LLC, that is still too big at that point. Just do the research and find some options and compare them.
I appreciate
and
that.
And there's all of those little incremental steps, right? They help us get where we're going.
And it's the only way I can do anything. Yes. I don't know. I have ADHD and I was diagnosed later in life. Yeah. And you're pointing to yourself too. And it's even like sometimes those larger tasks, we break them into smaller tasks, and then even the small tasks are too big. And it's like, oh, research LLC, what does that look like? Oh, okay, I'm going to go to this website and I'm going to understand what it means to, you know, have an S Corp or a C Corp, or how much does it cost? And like just really breaking it down.
And as long as you've got that next step, you are still moving forward. And you talked about something that is crucial to every creative venture that we do, honestly, any business ever, being able to find your ideal audience and market to them. Do you have any tips and advice that you can share with us as writers to help with that? Authors, etc.?
There's a lot of legwork that you can do, on the days when you are just not feeling the writing, or when you have some extra bonus time. I would highly recommend creating your own website as an author. So it could be, sarahwernerauthor.com, like whatever it is. It can be very simple. URLs are usually about $20. And then you can use a service like WordPress or Squarespace to build out your website. It does not have to be a huge website. It can be one page. And basically it needs to be, this is me. Here's maybe a headshot or a flattering picture of myself. Here's what I write and here's why. And just leave that up, let it exist. And if you can, build in a place for people to sign up for your newsletter, your email list. And even if you're not sending out active emails, start building out your email list. So there's a lot of, and I don't know how much you've talked about marketing on your show before, but there's this whole thing. It's the marketing funnel of people know who you are. And then there's 3 steps. Number 1, they get to know who you are. Number 2, they start to like you. And then number 3, they start to trust you. So it's called know, like, trust. And creating these things is setting you up for the like and trust. Meanwhile, while you have your website existing and while you have some sort of email database, like people use MailChimp, Tiny Letter, there's a lot of, I'm on Substack as well. There's a lot of great things out there. You're also going to be working on 1, maybe 2 social media platforms. And I say that,
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I say that because
Thank you.
I started off,
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I started off, let me tell you this horror story. I started off with, again, experimentally, I was like, well, I'm going to have a Twitter account for the Right Now podcast. I'm going to have a Facebook page for the Right Now podcast. I'm going to have, at the time, there was like Snapchat and like Vine and some other things for the Right Now podcast. And I'm going to also have a website for the Right Now podcast. And at some point, I'm going to release some episodes and have content. And it was so overwhelming that I just shut down.
Yes.
So then
oh
my gosh, well, it was a hard lesson to learn because I thought I could do it. Because I was like, what is it? 5 minutes a day. The people who tell you that it's just 5 minutes a day, they are not right. They are incorrect. Because there's so much else that goes into crafting a social media post and like understanding like what you're doing, who your audience is, why you're doing it. So I would suggest having 1 or 2 at the most social media accounts. And if you've already written your book, that's fine. But if you are still in the midst of writing your book, you have an opportunity to be a person online and to understand who it is, not only that you want to connect with, because as a writer, of course, I want to connect with other writers, but those other writers are probably not going to read my stuff because those writers are busy and overwhelmed and they're reading all of their friends' stuff. And so you have to understand like, okay, here's who the people are who are going to enjoy reading and or purchase my book. And these people have these traits in common. So back in the olden days of marketing, you would say like, their demographics are, women between 40 and 55 who are empty nesters and they live in the Midwest. But as the internet has made everything increasingly connected, a lot of those demographics don't matter anymore. And, it doesn't matter if this person is living in the Midwest or living on a coast or something like that, because everybody enjoys similar media. And so I'd encourage you to really dig into other traits that your audience might have So for Girl in Space, it was people who, at the very, very least, people who enjoy sci-fi. And even breaking that down even further and saying, okay, specifically people who really liked Mass Effect. Because there's a lot of similarity between this and Mass Effect. There's there's the found family feeling, there's the pacing, the tone, and really understanding then when you work backwards from there, where are these people hanging out? Who are these people and where are they hanging out online? And I've heard different kinds of advice. If you hate social media, then what you can do is choose a social media that you hate the least and be there. And that's a starting point for you. But if you're open to being where your audience is, I would suggest and recommend that you kind of feel around for where your audience is hanging out. And for me early on, that was Twitter. And I joined groups and I used hashtags. And what you really need to do is build a community. And it's a ton of work. But it's really the only way that you can even start marketing without looking like a tool. So if you're active on social media, I'm sure you've seen other writers who are like, today only 99 cents, buy my book. And I'm like, I don't even know who you are.
Yes. They just scroll through those posts.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just ignore those. Or even worse is when people like tag me and they're like, I think you'd like my book. And I'm like, I think I'm going to block you. Like, do not do that.
I didn't even know that people do that. Okay.
Oh, I get that. I get that a lot.
No, thank you.
I get that all the time. It's like it even borders on like gross or insulting. And so there's a right and a wrong way to market. And going into this with what you are posting on social media, the tips that I can give you for this is, since you already have your existing author website, make sure that a lot of what you do points back to your author website. I say this because, and actually I used to give talks on social media and personal branding. And one of the things that we talked about was like, do not have your entire online presence rest upon the shoulders of one platform that you don't own. And then witness what has happened with Twitter /X/ whatever it is. A lot of people, that was their whole online life. That was their database. And somebody else, the person who owns that platform, because you don't own it, the person who owns that platform was like, I'm going to change the name and maybe like tank this whole thing. And people scrambled, and they're still scrambling. And I lost thousands of followers. And it's like, where are they? I don't know where else they are. How am I going to find them again? A lot of them had signed up for my email list. So, that's a way to keep in touch with them. But really owning your own email list, that's your private personal database of fans, of people who got to know you and then maybe are in the point where they like you and are starting to trust you. And so, yes. And again, you don't have to send out tons of email newsletters. Just collect those names for a rainy day. You'll use it later. When you are selling your book and you've built up know, like, and trust with these people. But going back to social media, there's something else that I like to talk about, and that's the 80-20 rule. So I don't know if you're familiar with this or if you've talked about this before, and you can apply it to a lot of different things. It's a good ratio. But in marketing, the 80-20 rule is you can talk about yourself and your book 20% of the time. You can sell 20% of the time. You've got to earn it though, because the other 80% of the time you need to be providing some sort of value, whether it's entertainment value, if you're really funny and you make funny tweets about writing or science fiction or Mass Effect or whatever it is, whether it is educational, if you link to, oh my gosh, I love this analysis of Mass Effect, Mass Effect 3, and its ramifications on society, etc. You don't have to write all those articles, but even just delivering them as a service to the people who follow you. And then also, I said community building before, which is really person by person connecting. And this is really where I started. So again, if you're just getting started and you're overwhelmed and you're like, number one, build an author website. Number two, start an email list on MailChimp or something. And number three, pick one social media place where you can become or start You can become part of or start a community. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about people barging into my mentions and my DMs, like, buy my stuff. And I was like, I don't know who you are. What you need to do is let people know who you are and like be earnest and giving and communicate with other people. Really what you want to do, the number one PR rule that I've learned is just make friends wherever you go and do your best to like make friends. Because those people will become either fans of your work or advocates of your work. They will share your stuff. When I was starting off with Girl in Space, one of the things I did was look for other sci-fi podcasts and share those out. Mm-hmm. Because then what happened was, my followers got, because I released my episodes so far between, it gave them something to listen to while they're waiting for the next episode of Girl in Space. And also then those creators shared my show when new episodes came out to their audience. Mm-hmm. And you get this beautiful cross-pollination of audiences. And that was very valuable. So again, remember, you're not selling your book to other authors. You're working with them to leverage each other's audiences. And so that's part of the 80-20. The 80%, part of that 80% is sharing other people's work. And I don't know if you've been following this online, but very recently, there's been some authors who have been sabotaging other authors.
I've heard about that. I can't even fathom it. Like, I love the collaborative experience that I have with writers and where we build each other up and we promote each other and we encourage each other. Like, there's enough readers in the world. My ideal readers don't have to be your ideal readers. And if they are the shared ideal readers, then there's more for them to love.
They're going to read more than one book in a year. Even if you are jealous of other writers or creators. And I'm like, oh, they have more followers than me. Or they just posted that they hit 1 million downloads and I'm not, anywhere near that with this. Stuff that down.
Yeah.
And do what you can do to be generous and kind and understand that you're not in competition. Even though I know sometimes internally it can feel like you're competing, and maybe you are. Maybe you feel like, oh, I have to surpass this person in sales or numbers or whatever. You have to just remember that that's not what this is about. People buy more than one book a year. I read 52 books a year. I try to read a book a week, and I need more books all the time. And I need more podcasts to listen to.
Right.
And yeah, if you are willing to show that you are a generous person who promotes other people's work, and the people whose work you promote notice it and then promote your work in turn, I think you're really doing yourself a favor.
Yes, I agree. One of my last thoughts that I wanted to get in there about building that community, even when you haven't put your book out there yet, people connect with people. People don't connect with sales pages. People don't connect with buy my thing. People connect with people. And so I really got to experience that firsthand when I was going through a burnout with my podcast, my editing, my writing, and I could share that with my community. I used to release these episodes weekly, and I shared with my community that I was reaching burnout, and they were like, go down to every other week. They're like, we've got you. Like, you're doing too much enough as it is. And just to be able to have that support and that community that I've been building with Parents Who Write has been so uplifting. And so I didn't burn out. So I didn't quit. So, it's okay to share your struggles. Even when you're writing your book, this chapter got away from me and I can't figure out what to do with it. And that's what people connect with.
Because you're human. You're not perfect. You're not a machine. Nobody wants to connect with perfect. We kind of resent those people a little bit sometimes. I'd rather...
we do.
Yeah, I'd rather just know that we're kind of in all this together and that I'm not alone in my suffering.
Exactly. And on that cheerful note...
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Right? Thank you for joining us on the podcast and letting us all know that we're not alone in our suffering. Right? All of your contact information is in the show notes. But before we go, I have 2 questions. One is, what is it that you would like to share with people on how they can get in touch with you? the best way for them to reach out and connect with you, because you are amazing.
Well, thank you. And so are you. And so are you who's listening right now. You are also amazing. You can find me. I've learned to practice what I preach. And so you can find me out on my personal website, sarahwerner.com. That's SARAHWERNER.com, where you can look at the things I've created. You can join my mailing list. It's all free. Everything's free out there. I should probably find out a way to make money, but at some point I'll sell something. But take a look at my site. You can listen to my 2 podcasts, the Right Now podcast and Girl in Space. And again, you can access those from sarahwerner.com.
So fantastic. And then last bit of advice.
Ooh.
What is your number 1 top little advice to throw out there?
Okay, this might sound a little strange, but let go of all of the crap. and what I mean by that.
Oh, I love it.
What I mean by that is the reason I think a lot of us write and create is to experience some sort of freedom, whether that is freedom to create our own world, freedom to be our true selves, freedom to connect with other people, freedom to, escape your 9-to-5, whatever it is. We're looking for freedom. And it's really easy to let a lot of shoulds jump in there and say well, I should outline this first. I should, whatever. Don't let those get in the way. Remember at the end of the day why it is that you're writing and lean into that.
Oh, I love that so much. The big why that keeps us intrinsically motivated. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you immensely for joining me on the show. And I can't wait to chat with you again.
Yay. Well, thank you, Erin. This has been a delight. I love being on your show. And I'm so excited for people to hear this episode. I hope it's helpful.
Me too. Oh, I'm sure it will be. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.